Hey everyone, and welcome back to another deep dive with us. Today we're tackling a topic that's super important for UPSC aspirants. And frankly, it's a concept that affects all of us in India: democratic decentralization.
Absolutely. It's a big one, both for those exams and just understanding how our country works, how power is actually shared at different levels of government.
Right, getting down to those grassroots decisions that impact people every day. Like imagine if you were in charge of running your own village or town. What are some of the things you'd focus on? What would you want to change?
That's a great question to keep in mind as we go through this. And we're going to be drawing from today's Hindu, a key source for you UPSC folks.
For sure. So we'll be covering the historical background of this whole decentralization thing in India, some of the major roadblocks it's facing, and maybe even a peek into what the future holds.
This sounds good. So, to kick things off, it's important to remember this whole system of local governance, it didn't just appear overnight. We're talking about a long evolution, going all the way back to village councils under the British Raj.
Oh yeah, I remember reading about those in my history books. But then things really took a turn with the 73rd and 74th Amendments back in 1992. Those were like game changers, right?
Massive game changers. They gave constitutional status to local bodies, the panchayats and municipalities. And not just that, they also mandated things like reserved seats for women and marginalized groups, and gave them a much bigger say in planning and finances.
That's huge in terms of shifting power from the central government to these local bodies. But even with these amendments, we still see a lot of roadblocks when it comes to effective decentralization, and the Hindu reports on these all the time.
For sure, the roadblocks are real. One of the big ones is this issue of financial dependence. Lots of local bodies are basically stuck relying on funds from state and central governments.
Which kind of defeats the purpose of decentralization, doesn't it? If you're constantly waiting for handouts and approvals from higher-ups.
Exactly. It's like trying to run your household budget when someone else controls the purse strings. You might have amazing ideas for your village, but if you lack the financial independence to implement them, well, it's going to be tough to make any real progress.
And it's not just about the money, is it? The Hindu also frequently points to issues like political and bureaucratic centralization, where those higher levels of government still hold a lot of control.
Oh, absolutely. It's like having a shadow government breathing down your neck, second-guessing every decision you make. This kind of atmosphere, it can really stifle innovation of the local level.
So you have this tension between wanting to empower local bodies, but then those empowered at the state or national level are maybe hesitant to let go of control. And then there's the whole thing about centrally sponsored schemes, many of which might not actually fit the specific needs of a particular village or town.
That's a really good point. It's like being handed a blueprint for a house that just doesn't suit your family's lifestyle or the climate you live in. Sure, it might look good on paper, but it's not going to be functional.
Right? Those national priorities sometimes clash with what's actually happening on the ground. And then to add another layer of complexity, you have the issue of accountability, or in some cases, the lack thereof.
Transparency and accountability are so crucial, especially when you're talking about decentralization. If those mechanisms are weak, it just creates a breeding ground for corruption and inefficiency. People lose trust in their local institutions, and then the whole system suffers.
And that loss of trust, that's a tough one to recover from. It can make people cynical about the entire process, and they just disengage from local governance altogether. But what's interesting is that despite all these challenges, we do see some local bodies that are absolutely killing it. They're finding creative ways to work within the system and achieve some pretty remarkable results.
That's what we'll be looking at in the next part of our deep dive. We'll delve into those success stories that offer valuable lessons for you as future administrators, showing you what effective decentralization actually looks like in practice.
All right, welcome back, everyone. So in the last part, we talked about some of those challenges that democratic decentralization faces here in India. But now, let's shift gears a bit and focus on what happens when things actually go right, when those local bodies really make a difference.
Because there are success stories out there, and those offer some valuable lessons, especially for UPSC aspirants who might be dealing with this topic in their exams or, even in their future careers as civil servants.
Exactly. And one of those stories that caught my eye recently was featured in The Hindu. It's about the Indore Municipal Corporation. They've done some really innovative stuff with their financial management.
Like what, specifically?
Well, they've figured out a way to leverage land banks for revenue generation, which means they're less reliant on those sometimes unpredictable state government funds. Oh, that's smart. taking control of their own finances, so they're not always waiting for handouts.
Right, and this has allowed them to invest in some key infrastructure projects and improve those essential services that citizens rely on.
It's like they've become a model for other municipalities to follow.
Absolutely. And this kind of success story isn't just limited to urban areas either. If you look at a state like Kerala, they have this long tradition of participatory governance, and one of their standout initiatives is the People's Plan campaign.
Oh yeah, I've read about that. It basically turns the whole top-down approach to planning on its head, right?
Exactly. Instead of bureaucrats in some far-off capital deciding what's best for a village, you have the citizens themselves directly involved in that planning and budgeting process at the local level.
It's about bringing governance closer to the people, letting them have a real voice in shaping their own communities.
Right. It's about their needs and priorities taking center stage. And you know what? The results have been pretty impressive.
Yeah, from what I've read, the People's Plan campaign has led to more transparency, definitely a stronger sense of ownership among those communities, and even better accountability from local officials.
For sure, it shows what can happen when you trust people, when you give them that seat at the table. They can really drive positive change.
So all these success stories, they're definitely inspiring, but they also kind of make you wonder, like, why aren't these models being replicated more widely across India?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's something that UPSC aspirants should definitely be thinking about. One key factor, I think, is the role of political will.
Meaning?
Well, you need leaders, both at the state and local levels, who genuinely believe in the power of decentralization and are willing to let go of some of that control.
It's got to be more than just lip service, though, right? You need those leaders to actually walk the walk.
Totally. Without that kind of commitment, even the best designed policies just end up gathering dust on a shelf somewhere. And it's not just about the leaders at the top either. You need those local elected representatives, those panchayats and municipalities who are really proactive and engaged, willing to work with their communities.
It's about fostering that culture of decentralization, where everyone understands their roles and feels empowered to contribute.
Absolutely. But leadership alone isn't enough. Our sources often highlight the need for capacity building as well.
Capacity building, meaning?
Well, think of it this way. You can give those local bodies all the power and authority in the world. But if they lack the skills, the knowledge to actually manage those complex governance functions, things can fall apart pretty quickly. It's like handing someone a toolbox full of powerful tools, but with no instructions on how to use them.
A recipe for disaster, for sure.
Exactly. So investing in capacity building, it's crucial. This means providing training to those elected representatives, to local officials, equipping them with the tools and the knowledge they need. Things like financial management, project planning, service delivery, even conflict resolution.
So it's not just about giving them power. It's about making sure they can use that power effectively and responsibly.
Right. And we can't forget about technology's role in all of this.
Oh yeah, the tech piece. We touched upon this earlier, but it's worth emphasizing. Think about all those e-governance platforms that are popping up.
They're making it easier for citizens to access information, file complaints, track the progress of government schemes.
It's like shining a light on those inner workings of government, which could be a really powerful weapon against corruption and inefficiency, right?
Totally. And it's not just about transparency. Technology can also help streamline all those processes, making things way more efficient. Imagine a village where people can pay their taxes online or apply for documents without having to stand in line for hours.
That's the kind of impact that technology can have at the local level.
Right. It's about making governance more accessible, more responsive to people's needs.
And we've got to be careful with technology too, right? It's just a tool. And like any tool, it can be used for good or for bad.
Couldn't agree more. We need to make sure it's being used ethically, that there are safeguards in place to protect people's privacy and prevent misuse. And just as importantly, we need to bridge that digital divide, making sure everyone has access to technology and the skills to use it.
Because it's not really empowering if only certain segments of society can benefit from it, right?
Exactly. We want everyone to have the opportunity to leverage those technological advancements. But let's shift gears for a second and talk about another really important piece of the puzzle, the representation of marginalized groups.
That's a huge one. And the Hindu reports on this a lot, especially when it comes to local governance.
Yeah, and it's something that UPSC folks should definitely be aware of. We know that the 73rd and 74th Amendments introduced those reservations for women, scheduled castes, and scheduled tribes in local bodies. But just having those seats reserved, it doesn't automatically mean they have real power and influence.
Because there's often this gap between representation, and actual participation.
Exactly. Like,
Yeah.
there are cases of proxy representation where women might be elected, but then their male family members are the ones really calling the shots behind the scenes.
Oh, it's like they're just a figurehead, but the real power lies elsewhere.
Exactly. And that's not what we want. So we need to address those deeper social norms and power structures that prevent marginalized groups from fully participating, from having their voices truly heard.
It's about going beyond just ticking those boxes, saying,
Hmm.
okay, we have the required number of women representatives. It's about creating a system where they can actually exercise their leadership and make a real difference.
And that requires a lot of work. It's about education, about providing resources and support to empower those individuals, to help them challenge those age-old hierarchies that have excluded them for far too long.
Because ultimately, it's about making sure that the benefits of decentralization reach everyone, not just a select few.
It's about creating a system that is truly inclusive and representative of the diversity of India.
Now, that's a powerful goal to strive for. And I think it's something that UPSC aspirants should really take to heart as they prepare for their exams.
Absolutely. Understanding these nuances, these complexities of democratic decentralization, it's not just about memorizing facts and figures for those exams. It's about developing those critical thinking skills, that ability to analyze complex situations and come up with innovative solutions.
And it's about, understanding how those theoretical concepts actually play out in the real world.
For sure. Because at the end of the day, this is about preparing you to be effective, ethical administrators who can tackle those real-world challenges and contribute to building a better India.
Now, before we wrap up this part, just a quick reminder that we'll be continuing this deep dive in the next segment, exploring some potential solutions, some ways forward, and maybe even taking a glimpse into what the future of decentralization might hold for India.
So definitely stick around for that.
And we're back for the final stretch of our deep dive into democratic decentralization in India. We've covered a lot of ground, from the historical journey to those persistent roadblocks and even those inspiring success stories. But now it's time to tackle the big so what question. Why should all of this matter to you, especially if you're a UPSC aspirant burning the midnight oil, prepping for those exams?
That's the key link, right? We're not just here for a casual chit-chat about local governance. We want to equip you with the knowledge, the insights that'll not only help you ace those UPSC exams, but also prepare you for your future roles as, well, hopefully, as effective administrators and change makers.
Exactly. This isn't just some abstract concept you memorize from a textbook. Democratic decentralization, it's a living, breathing system that affects pretty much every aspect of governance in India. From rural development and poverty alleviation to even environmental sustainability and social justice. It's all connected.
And it's woven into the UPSC syllabus, it pops up everywhere. Think about those essay questions where you have to analyze complex problems and come up with solutions. Having a solid grasp of decentralization, it gives you a framework to tackle those challenges, to connect the dots between policy, implementation, and the actual impact it has on people's lives.
And it's not just the written exams either. Picture this. You're in that UPSC interview facing a panel of those seasoned bureaucrats, and they throw you a curveball. They're like, okay, tell us how you would strengthen Panchayati Raj Institutions. If you can back up your answers with concrete examples, like the Indore model or Kerala's People's Plan campaign that we talked about earlier, it shows them you've actually thought about this stuff.
Exactly. They're not just looking for someone who can parrot back facts and figures. They want to see critical thinking, problem-solving abilities, a real understanding of how things actually work on the ground.
So when you're studying this topic, don't just cram those dates and names. Take a step back and ask yourself, what are the bigger principles at play here? What are the potential downsides, those trade-offs? And how can we learn from both the successes and the failures?
And here's a crucial point, especially when you're thinking about the ethics paper in the UPSC. Decentralization is inherently tied to ethical governance. It's about empowering people, fostering transparency and accountability at the grassroots level.
It's about shifting away from that top-down, controlling approach to a system where citizens have a genuine say in shaping their own communities, their own futures.
Right. And that brings us to a final thought-provoking question for you as you continue on this UPSC journey. We've talked a lot about fiscal autonomy, giving those local bodies more control over their finances. We've talked about administrative autonomy, letting them manage their own affairs. But what about social and cultural autonomy? How do we make sure that decentralization respects the incredible diversity of India, all those local traditions, customs, knowledge systems, while also upholding those core principles of equity and justice for everyone.
Wow, that's a big one. It challenges us to think beyond just those structures of governance and consider those lived realities, the people we ultimately want to serve.
Because at the end of the day, successful decentralization, it's about creating a system that works for everyone, a system that allows communities to flourish while preserving that rich tapestry of Indian culture and heritage.
It's about finding that balance between unity and diversity, between local needs and those national priorities. And on that note, folks, we've reached the end of our deep dive into democratic decentralization in India.
We hope you found it insightful, that you learned a thing or two that'll not only help you in your UPSC preparation, but also inspire you to think critically about the kind of administrators, the kind of leaders you want to be.
And as always, we encourage you to stay curious, stay engaged, and definitely check out today's Hindu for even more in-depth analysis and perspectives on this crucial topic.
If any questions popped up during this deep dive, or if you just want to share your thoughts, feel free to drop those in the comments below.
And hey, don't forget to hit that subscribe button to stay tuned for our next exploration of another exciting and essential topic for your UPSC journey. Until then, happy studying and best of luck with those exams.